Hello, Philippines! Welcome to Bet on Your Baby! Hello, babies! Are you all excited?
Yes.
I see. Yesterday's episode we talked about math. Today's episode we will talk about science that talks about Newtonian. Does anyone of you know what is Newtonian?
Ma'am, I know that.
Newtonian means relating to the work of Isaac Newton or obeying the laws described by him. Classical mechanics is sometimes still called Newtonian mechanics because it is based on the laws first set out by Isaac Newton.
Sir Isaac Newton was an English mathematician, physicist, astronomer, alchemist, theologian, and author who was described in his time as natural philosopher. He was born on 25th December of 1642 and was died on 20th of March 1726. Newton is best known for having invented the calculus in the mid to late 1660s and for having formulated the theory of universal gravity, the latter in his Principia, the single most important work in the transformation of early modern natural philosophy into modern philosophical or physical science. Isaac Newton's theory was being called Newtonian, or relating to Sir Isaac Newton or to his theories and discoveries, especially on Newtonian physics. Thank you.
Very well said, Lerio. Now that we know what does Newtonian mean and who is Isaac Newton, let me share some important information about the scientific revolution of Newtonian. The concept of universal gravitation, that every particle of matter attracts every other particle with the force proportional to the product of the two masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, is Newton's major contribution to science and the centerpiece of his work. The observed structure of the solar system was perfectly explained by assuming that the major organizing force among heavenly bodies was gravity. In order to apply the theory of universal gravitation to heavenly bodies with curved paths through space, Newton built upon the contributions of the mathematicians of the age and developed calculus. Using this tool, he discovered that the attraction exerted by a spherical body on an external point could be calculated by assuming the mass of the body was concentrated at its precise center. This theory was the final step in producing accurate calculations, and soon the mechanisms of organization in the universe became clear to him.
Wow! And don't you know, guys, there's a thing called Newtonian physics? Well, if you're curious, let me tell you something about it. Newtonian physics, the publication in 1687 of Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy by English scientist Sir Isaac Newton, was the culmination of a reduction philosophy of science that used force in action to explain the fundamentals of motion or energy, time and space or position. Newton developed a new form of mathematics, calculus, as a framework to his new physics. Newtonian physics are good approximation for replicating most circumstances in our physical world. On Earth or in virtual worlds using Newtonian physics, objects will fall at 9.8 meter per second, and that per second are the metric units for acceleration. Newtonian physics assumes a direct connection between cause and effect. Electric and magnetic forces pose a dilemma for this interpretation since there is no direct contact between the two charges, rather there is an action at a distance. Well, since Newton physics is also mathematically simple, it remains the standard for calculating the motions of almost all objects from machine parts, fluids, and bullets to spacecraft, planets, and galaxies.
Enough, Liz. I also want to share something about it. It's called Newtonian fluid. Newtonian fluids are named after Isaac Newton. Newtonian fluid is a fluid in which the viscous stresses arising from its flow are at every point linearly correlated to the local strain rate, the rate of change of its deformation over time. Stresses are proportional to the rate of change of the fluid's velocity vector. A fluid is Newtonian only if the tensors that describe the viscous stress and the strain rate are related by a constant viscosity tensor that does not depend on the stress state and velocity of the flow. If the fluid is also isotropic, mechanical properties are the same along any direction, the viscosity tensor reduces to two real coefficients, describing the fluid's resistance to continuous shear deformation and continuous compression or expansion respectively. Newtonian fluids are the simplest mathematical models of fluids that account for viscosity, while no real fluids fits the definition perfectly. Many common liquids and gases, such as water and air, can be assumed to be Newtonian for practical calculations under ordinary conditions.
Good job, Lizelle and Debbie. How about you, Desiree? You want to say something?
Well, I know something about Newton. It's Newton's law of motion. Sir Isaac Newton's law of motion explained the relationship between a physical object and the forces acting upon it. Understanding this information provides us with the basis of modern physics. There are three laws of motion by Sir Isaac Newton. It is inertia, force, and action and reaction. Newton's first law states that every object will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line unless compelled to change in state by the action of an external force. This tendency to resist changes in a state of motion is inertia. His second law defines a force to be equal to change in momentum, or mass times velocity, per change in time. Momentum is defined to be the mass m of an object times its velocity v. The acceleration of an object depends on the mass of the object and the amount of force applied. The third law of Newton, the action and reaction, whenever one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object exerts an equal and opposite force on the first. His third law states that for every action or force in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In other words, forces results from interactions.
Me. I also know something about Newtonian. It's called Newtonian mechanics. The foundation of Newtonian mechanics is the application of Newton's law of motion, which make the assumption that space, time, and mass are absolute concepts, and that motion occurs in an inertial frame. This Newtonian mechanics describes the motion of objects in routine life affected by the force. Newton mechanics is the most straightforward in its formulation, and based on Newton's second law, it is the efficient in most cases, especially for consideration of particles under the influence of forces. There two concepts in Newtonian mechanics. These are the law of inertia. A body remains at rest or uniform motion unless acted upon by force. Second is the equation of motion. A body acted upon by a force moves in such a manner that time rate of changes of momentum equals to forces. Newtonian mechanics is related to our routine life as the application of force to do something. For example, when you jump, your feet apply force to the ground, and the earth applies an equal and opposite reaction force that pushes you into the air. When a person is in the water pushes the person forward while the person pushes the water back. Both affect each other.
That was quite impressive, Desiree and April. And today, we'll see whose baby really stood out for that audience. And we will find out after this short commercial break.